Evening, everybody. This is Lea Elias coming to you live with Puckdrop Live as courtesy of We Live Hockey Elimination Cafe and also coming to you live from Hockey Wraparound, all the 3 million pages that we run here in our side of the world. So once again, for those of you just joining, the way this is going to work is I always kind of talk for a few minutes before I really jump into the topic. Tonight's topic is going to be fighting's place in the NHL, why I believe it needs to stay, why it's part of the game. I know it's a touchy subject. I know it scares a lot of people, but I actually have some good information about why it belongs in the professional game. We're not talking the amateur game today. That's a totally different conversation for sure. I've got some detailed notes. I've got some detailed facts. I've got lots of different things that I want to share with you. And as always, this is an interactive conversation. I can already see people commenting, and I really appreciate all of you being here. And I have a lot of good information on this topic. It's something that's funny. I actually did, almost 2 decades ago, my senior project on this in high school, about why fighting has a place in the NHL and why it should remain in the NHL. I'm also going to bring us all through the history of that a little bit today. So again, I can see people coming on. We got Caitlin Elizabeth from Philadelphia. She says hello. Mark Polly Pollard from Australia says good morning, Mr. Elias. Sir, I hope Thursday is looking wonderful. It was still on Wednesday over here in the stateside, but I'm glad. I know you told me that this is something you do in the morning, so I appreciate you. And Sharpjack from Minnesota says Philly sucks. Well, Philly's in the playoffs right now, and you're not, so that's tough. But, actually none of us are in the playoffs now, to be fair. Jeff Dwyer coming on. Good evening, sir. Hello, hello. Once again, I'm going to get started here in a minute. I'm talking about fighting in the NHL, why I think it needs to stay. I am going to give a brief kind of essay on this, which I get the impression most of you like that I kind of back up my stuff with facts. At least I hope you do. And I'm going to be kind of opening this up for conversation because this is one of those topics that goes both ways. If you watched our quick shift today with Travis and I, this is one of those topics we said that, if someone doesn't want fighting in the NHL, I encourage people not to jump on that person, whether it be metaphorically or not, because it's a fair topic to discuss. And what I mean by that is people that don't want fighting in the NHL, I respect their argument most of the time, even if I don't agree with it. And I'm going to back up my argument about why fighting needs to be in the NHL with hopefully some history, some facts, and just, you know how I do this. I try and give it a little more in-depth knowledge than just, we don't like it, or it's fun to watch. You know what I mean? So that's what we're going to do. Sharpshack says Boston. I know a team you root for, bud. That's the ultimate insult, not mentioning the Bruins. I got a nice jasmine tea here for you tonight that care. And we're going to get started here in a minute. So Jeff Dwyer says, the only thing wild in Minnesota for hockey is Stahl finding his game again before the pause. I met Eric Stahl at the All-Star game this year in St. Louis. As you can imagine, great human being, great person to speak to. I'm actually very happy to hear that he's got his career going again. So Ray Carcillo is here all the way from Los Angeles, California, where it's been raining most days. Today is Ray Carcillo's birthday. I will not tell you how young he is, but he is a year older today. Ray, happy birthday. He's been having some amazing food today. He's been calling me and telling me about every meal he's having. And with the current situation, I say go for it, man. Keep going for it. Caitlin, I did share this to the cafe, Hockey Wraparound, and We Live Hockey. We should be firing on all fronts. I found out a way I can do that live right from the producer log here. So also after the broadcast tonight, Ray Carcillo, around 9:30 Eastern, I believe, will be going live with Wednesday Night Hockey on NHL 20 through his Twitch stream. We are going to try and figure out a way to get that broadcasted live through Facebook so you don't have to go to multiple places because we're all very lazy about clicking on another site nowadays. I'm talking to you. Anyway, let's get going here. Okay, again, tonight's topic is fighting in hockey. Start the recording for the podcast people that listen, which we do get a fair amount of podcast listens a week, which, I don't know, I shouldn't be surprised whenever I find out people listen to the stuff that we do. We've been doing this for like 3 years. You'd hope you have an audience by that point, right? But Travis and I are always surprised when we get feedback. And I actually had Caitlin, for those of you listening, put together a map last night of all the places people said they were. We put a post out earlier this week asking kind of where people were coming from, and it's all around the country and internationally, obviously, with Australia and Canada and England and some places of Europe. But we really do have a pretty large national audience in the populated areas of the country, which is pretty cool. All right, so here we go. I'm going to start right now with tonight's topic on Puckdrop Live. Here's a question that everybody always has and always asks and always wants to know with the NHL is, does fighting belong in the NHL? For those of you who don't know, I'm Lea Elias. This is Puckdrop Live. I am simulcast broadcasting this on Facebook Live. If you are hearing this on the podcast afterwards, it is pre-recorded. There are people that are commenting, so we can hopefully get some opinions and have a good discussion here with me and our audience on Facebook Live. We are broadcasting live on We Live Hockey, Elimination Cafe, and Hockey Wraparound, the three channels that we own, run, and operate. Sound like a KYW News Radio 1060. That's Philadelphia's kind of NPR here. But the question tonight is, does fighting belong in the NHL? So before I get going into this, my answer is yes, it does. And my job and my goal is to prove to you listening or watching this that I'm right. That's the whole purpose of the show. Now, with that said, I hope there are people out there that do disagree with me that fighting does not belong in the NHL. That's your stance, because I'd like to have that discussion. I like to go back and forth and debate this. I never have a problem with someone disagreeing with what I said as long as they're willing to bring facts to the table. And in order to kind of look at fighting in the NHL, we really have to dive right into the history of fighting so you can understand its origins, where it's came from, where it's been, where it is now, and probably where it's going. Before you can come to the determination of should it be taken out of the game, okay? So I'm already getting a lot of yeses on the feed that hockey absolutely needs fighting in the game, which is wonderful. Again, keep commenting throughout this. I will read all the comments that are pertain to this 100%. So here's your history lesson. Fighting in the NHL dates back to the legit earliest days of the game. In fact, it goes back to the 19th century. In the first organized hockey game ever played indoors, okay, that's considered widely the first indoor game is the first game, there was a fight. In fact, the game didn't even end. It ended with a fight. So there was no final score. Both teams dropped the gloves and everybody came on. So when you look at the early time period of the game, again, you're looking late 19th century, late 1800s, and one of the things that didn't exist at that time like they do today is rules, right? There was a lack of rules in the game. And anytime you lack rules, you lack order, and disorderly things happen. You also have to keep in mind the culture of the time. We're talking about Canada at the turn of the century. There is a lot of poverty at this time in the country. There's also a lot of high crime, right? So you got people playing the game that are impoverished people that probably have committed a crime. I'm not shaking them down with that. That's just the reality of late 19th century Canada, right? So the game started with that level of aggression, if you can think about it, right? So right from the start, fighting was just part of the game. Now, when you look at how the game evolved and you get to kind of the early 1900s, around the time the NHL was actually formed, that 1918 1919 time period, well, they put blue lines into the game. And for those of you who remember the game prior to two-line passes being taken out, and nobody can remember before blue lines, but the blue lines actually made the game more physical because now you have zones, you can't spread the ice out that much. So the game actually ended up becoming more physical, and although there were more rules, fighting continued to happen, right? Now, I've done a lot of research on this prior to the episode, in addition to the stuff that kind of I already knew, and I kind of put the fighting into 4 different eras of hockey, right? Starting from the start of the NHL. Again, so another key factor I forgot to say at the beginning is that we're only looking at fighting in professional hockey, right? So we're not talking about amateur hockey, or we're not talking about college hockey, we're not talking about youth hockey. I do not believe that fighting has any place in youth hockey or college hockey at this time, or any adult league. Let me put it this way. If you're wearing a cage, and I'll have thoughts on this later, if you're wearing a cage, or a league requires you to wear a cage, there's no need to fight in that league. It just doesn't have a place. Mainly because people don't know how to do it, and they don't understand the code behind it. And that's something that's very sacred in the professional level. Again, I'll get to that later. So I've broken hockey fighting down into 4 different eras, okay? And I gave them some of them have cool names, right? So 1920 to 1960. This is basically from the start of the NHL till about the expansion of the NHL. I call this the brutal age, okay? Sounds like a really cool RPG video game that I want to make. It's called Brutal Age, okay? This is the time period where you see fights where guys are using their sticks as a weapon. They're cracking each other on the skulls. People go to the hospital. Maurice Richard, I remember when he was playing, got punched. He hit a guy in the back. He got hit in the back of the head with a stick. He was swinging stick. It was brutal. It was a brutal time period. And again, these are the earlier years of the NHL. In fact, probably the first half of the existence of the NHL, where fighting was just crazy. Now, again, you got to look at the time period. 1920, you're kind of past the First World War. Then you're going to go up until the 30s. There's a Great Depression. 1940s, World War II. Then you have the Korean War. You have, Vietnam comes a little bit later. All right, so these are tough times in the country in terms of the type of people you're dealing with. These are rough, gruff people that grew up without food and know how to fight for a job, much less fight on the hockey rink. So when you think about that and you pour that into the game, and again, this isn't just limited to hockey. Hockey was just the only sport that allowed this type of rules. If you look at other sports at this time, there were some crazy melees that happened as well, especially if you look at like the early years of the NFL, which was incredible. At that time period, in the early time period of the NFL, college football was much more popular than the NFL, but that's a totally different topic for another podcast. So I called it the brutal age because guys could get away with almost anything. There was a lot of, I hate to say this, but there was a lot of racism at this time, so a lot of stuff was overlooked, especially against French-Canadian players. There's a great movie called The Rocket. It's a French-Canadian movie about Maurice Richard that I recommend every one of you watch if you have a chance. But it goes through how, Richard, a lot of people don't realize this, but I don't think Richard ever won the scoring title while he was playing. And it sounds like at that time period in the NHL, they would purposely not give him points, purposely take him out of the game. There was a riot in Montreal when he was suspended after a ref held him while he was punched by a Bruins player. I mean, there's a crazy stories involving Richard. And he was a major proponent of change in the game about how players were treated fairly in what is probably one of the toughest eras in league history. I mean, it was just incredible. So we move on from the brutal age, to the golden age of fighting. Okay, now this is the 1960s, mid-60s, till about the 1980s. Now, there's two teams that pretty much owned it during this time, and that's the Boston Bruins and the Philadelphia Flyers. There is no other team during this era that could compare with the Big Bad Bruins and the Broad Street Bullies, right? And what happened was this is the era, and I call it the Golden Age, where toughness was used as a tactic. Now, during the Brutal Age, I think it was just kind of part of it. Everyone was just ready to kill, right? In the Golden Age, this is where intimidation becomes a tactic in addition to the skill sets and everything else that was going on. So one of the funny things about the Broad Street Bullies, the Flyers, is they were birthed from the Bruins, right? So the Bruins used to mop the ice with the Flyers, and the Flyers didn't like that, and they decided to put together this team of really tough guys called the Broad Street Bullies. Now, if there's any misunderstanding of how hated the Broad Street Bullies were for their tactics, which is just complete intimidation, there are still teams that hate that group today. I've talked to Rangers fans recently that just hate the Broad Street Bullies. They just thought they cheated. They were horrible. But here's how I look at it, all right? And I do have to defend the Flyers here, is that Phil Esposito, a famous Bruin, like one of the most famous Bruin up there with Orr, you Bruins fans listening will agree with me, has said repeatedly that the Broad Street Bullies, who won back-to-back cups in 1974 and 1975, you don't win 2 cups in a row if you're not good at hockey. Like it was more than just the Philly flu that people got. Now, there was absolutely an intimidation factor with Dave Schultz, the Hammer, and the rest of the team, but the team could also play hockey. And this is true of the Bruins prior to the Flyers as well. So what you're seeing in the Golden Age is a little bit more harnessing of fighting as a tactic. It was widespread. There was fights every game. The movie Slapshot is obviously based on this era and how fighting was used as a tactic to intimidate other teams. And again, at this time, the rules are not super crazy, but you start to see less stick waving. You start to see less cheap shots. It becomes a little bit more organized. I don't want to act like it was fair. I mean, you can go online and see plenty of videos of guys pulling each other's hair and sucker punching, but it becomes a little bit of a different era. Again, it's just not as brutal as the 40 years prior, right? So you get the Golden Age, it's the Bruins and the Flyers. Now, something interesting starts to happen towards the end of the 70s as you get towards the 80s, and the Montreal Canadiens defeated the Flyers in 1976 to take back the cup and go on another dynasty run. And that was when Guy Lafleur was with the Canadiens, and the team really had a flow to them that kind of overdid the fighting. The skill kind of came back. Now, when you get into the 80s, and this is what I call the enforcer era. This is the era most of us are going to remember because we grew up with it. But from 1980 to 2005, okay, which is the last season lost due to a lockout, I call this the enforcer era. And I love it because it's almost its own evolution point. Like, for example, if the continents were to split again and we didn't see each other for millions of years, species would evolve differently. Well, from 1980 to 2005, you saw the birth of the enforcer, full-out enforcer. I'm not so sure during that golden age I talked about there were enforcers because everyone played that role. Again, you had Dave the Hammer Schultz, you had Terry O'Reilly, but I don't know if they were actually called enforcers at that time as much as they were just tough guys that you don't get in the way. Something interesting happens in 1980. You know, you have the Oilers win 4 cups in a row. I'm sorry, the Islanders win. I always mix these teams up for some reason, and I know who they are. It's just the way they sound. The Islanders win 4 cups in a row. Very tough team. Billy Smith, the goaltender, might have been the goon on that team. But obviously in 1984, Wayne Gretzky and the Oilers start to win Stanley Cups with Mark Messier, a hard-nosed player. Obviously, there's so many all-stars on this team. This team changed the game, having lost to the Oilers. Lost to the Islanders in 1983. They started winning cups in 1984, 85, 87, 88. Okay, and there's a player on the Oilers called Marty McSorley, right? And what you start to find out is that, and not just Marty McSorley, there's other players as well, and this would continue with the Kings with Gretzky later on. You start to see players being put on the line with guys like Wayne Gretzky that are legit tough guys. They're enforcers. And the idea is they're out there with Wayne Gretzky to give him as much room as he needs to do his job. And to pretty much tell any player, if you touch Wayne, I will kill you. That is exactly what an enforcer is, right? You enforce the rules. You do not touch the player on my team or I will kill you. All right, or you're going to fight me, one of those things, right? Now, this role evolves and evolves and evolves through time. And, by the time you get to the 90s, every single team has a player like this. And this is when you see some of the greatest fights in NHL history. Now, the difference between the golden age and this age, and the golden age is like the bench clearing brawls, right? Where just the whole team jumps on the ice and they're all kicking the crap out of each other. And again, that might be a bit much today, but that was the golden age, right? The enforcer era is toe-to-toe boxing. You get 2 enforcers together, and they fight. And this is the time period you start getting the names of these enforcers, right? And again, this is where I want you to start typing. Type in the name of your favorite enforcers of all time. I'll start reading them out here, right? But there's a ton of them. I mean, some of them, Donald Brashear was an enforcer, not even the best one, Some of the goalies were enforcers at this time. But every single team had a player that that guy's going to go toe-to-toe with you every single night, right? Like Rob Ray is a great example of this, right? Bob Probert is maybe the ultimate example of this. I mean, there's been movies made about this guys. In fact, another movie you should check out is, I think it's called Enforcers. Someone out here has seen it. Just comment with the name of it. I think it's called Enforcers or Gladiators, something like that. Last Gladiator. I can't remember it, but yeah, there's a lot of different enforcers during this time, and you know that this is evolving because you can know some of their names, you can know who they were on each team, and when they got traded, it was a big deal. And the fights during this time, the toe-to-toe battles, and they were fights. These guys were trained to box and beat the crap out of each other. Now, we have to put a little note in here. This is prior to people knowing about CTE. This is prior to people knowing about how bad a concussion actually was. I've told many people when I was playing, a concussion was a day-to-day injury. You just kind of got it and you got back out there. Today, you might take an entire year off or months off if it's a major concussion. So, again, history does not back this time period, but that's not the type of fighting that I'm going to say is needed today. But the enforcer era, 1980 to 2005, this is something that existed heavily in the NHL. And I'm getting some names here. Jeff Dwyer says Ty Domi, Ron Hextall, Eddie Belfour was a fighter. Josh Law says the Boogeyman. Right? There's just a lot of them. You know what I mean? Marty McSorley, Jeff Dwyer says, as we said that. Mike Milbury, which is a little more of the golden age. He jumped in. An analyst at Hartman says this. This is true. He jumped into the crowd to fight someone. I think that was at the Boston Garden? Analyst said. Do you know? Or is that in Montreal? I can't remember. But fans would go in the golden age. These guys would go in the stands and beat up fans. That's what I said. Just lawless, right? The enforcer era, you see more laws. All right, you understand that the rule comes in about bench clearing brawls, third man in rule, which was, we used to talk about that all the time. We don't have to talk about it anymore, but the third man in rule is put in, which means that ended bench clearing brawls. If the third man came in, he was kicked out of the game right away. So that just made that's where you got the fisticuffs, kind of the one-on-one matchup. And I liked it for a time period, right? Mark Pollard, yes, it was called Ice Guardians. Thank you. Sharp Shack also says Tony Twist, right? Tony Twist was another one, but Ice Guardians is that movie about the enforcers. Now, after 2005, you get into the modern era, which is 2006 on, right? Now, this is when the NHL changed dramatically a lot of the rules. They opened up the game, which I think was not a mistake. They took away two-line passing. They really said, okay, we're not going to focus on the ability to fight as much as we're going to focus on the ability for skill sets. And since 2006, the game has evolved quite beautifully, I might say, in the skill set era. I mean, the game is incredibly skilled now, more than I've ever seen in the history of my life watching this game for all of it. So that spans close to 4 decades. So coming up on 4 decades, I should say. But I do like the changes that they have made. But obviously, the modern era, because the game is more open, because there's more information on head hits and everything, fighting has dramatically come down. And, we have the statistics to show that. If you look at hockey from, the 2000s, early 2000s, you average about a fight every other game. So every other game in the NHL, a little over that, there's a fight, right? So just to give you some numbers, like in 2002, there's 800 fights. In 2004, there were 789 fights. 2017-18, 280 fights. 2018-19, 230 fights. So there's about a fight now every 2 out of 10 games. Whereas in the modern era, the Enforcer era, you're looking at a fight every other game. 6 out of 10 games, there's a fight at that time period. So it has come down quite dramatically. It says here again, percentage of games with fights in the last season is 16%, 17%. Whereas in the start of the century, it's 40-50%, right? So that gives you an idea that the rule changes have dramatically decreased fighting in the game. All right, and another interesting stat here too is the number of players who fought. So this one has gone down too. At the turn of the century, 300 to 350 players a season would fight. Now it's down below 200. So it just shows you that it's not out of the game, but it is slowly coming out of the game. Again, some great names here. Jeff Dwyer says Claude Lemieux, Sean Avery, McCarty, Wah, and Osgood. That was a fight. I think that was Wah. Wah fought Osgood, but Wah also fought Vernon in that rivalry series. So for those of you listening, I put up the question of what topic do you want this week? One of the other topics that I want to talk about probably next week is the best rivalries in the NHL. And for a time period, Colorado and Detroit was the best rivalry, but I don't think it is the best rivalry in the NHL. That probably belongs easily to Boston and Montreal. But getting back to fighting, okay? So there's your 4 eras: the brutal era, 1920 to 1960, the golden age, 1960 through 1980, Enforcer era, 1980 to 2005, and then the modern era, which is 06 through 2020. Okay, it's assuming no more major rule changes are coming. So again, that's kind of your history on where fighting came from. Now let's just quickly get into the reasons for fighting, right? And this is where I find people don't completely understand why fighting's in the game. I'm going to try and explain to you now why it is in the game, okay? So within the NHL, the professional ranks, there's really only 2 reasons to fight. One of them is game-related, and one of them is a personal reason, okay? I want to start right away with saying that for the most part, I can't speak for every single fight, but there is a mutual respect and a code that must be followed when you're fighting at the professional ranks. And if you don't follow that, the word will get around the league. It is not good for players that do not subscribe to this, okay? So game-related reasons would be to turn the tide. A team is down by 4 goals. You get in a fight to try and charge your team up. You have to protect the player. Sometimes it's a little bit of payback. If a player was you're seeing this with Zach Cassian and Kachuk right now. Well, you were earlier in the season. Where the players police themselves. And that's kind of the whole key behind fighting we're going to talk about when I get to the point here. But players must police themselves, okay? The personal reasons, and this is not as prevalent now, but it could be a kid trying to make a name for himself, all right? When you're trying out for a team or you're at training camp and you want to make a name for yourself, fighting gets you in front of those scouts. It gets you in front of the GM. I mean, they see it. They want to see what you're willing to do to make the team. Now, in modern times, it's more jumping in front of pucks, sacrificing your body, doing whatever it takes to win. But you got to know at the professional rank, I wish this was true of every sport. It's true of hockey. You need to be able to take a punch. I don't know how else to say it. This is a tough sport, and it gets tougher the higher you go. If you don't have the physicality, if you don't have the ability to take some pain, if you don't have the ability to take a punch at the professional level, I'm not talking amateur, I'm not talking youth, you're not going to make it. I don't know how else to say that. You have to be incredibly skilled to have that part out of your game. And I'll tell you this, even the most skilled guys in the NHL are tough. I mean, let's go right to the top. Alex Ovechkin, right? Known as a goal scorer. He is not a guy you want to piss off on the ice. And he is notorious for coming back ferociously if you make him mad. I remember early in his career, around the 2008, 2007 time period, I can't remember, they were playing the Montreal Canadiens, that's all I remember, and someone broke his nose, right? It was a cheap play, and they broke his nose. Dude scored, I think, 4 goals. It was a hat trick or 4 goals after that in the same game. Came back and scored 4 goals. And you see this recently. If you piss Ovechkin off, he's going to put the puck in the net. But the point I'm making is he's a tough dude. He's a big dude, and he's a tough dude, okay? Yeah, even some of the smaller guys. I remember people talking about Mark Recchi and Martin St. Louis being like, don't mess with that guy. He'll take your legs out. So there's an era of toughness to this game that at the NHL level, you better have the ability to do it, or you're not going to last long. Just looking at some of the comments here, Mark Pollard says Ryan Reeves. That would be more of a modern enforcer type player. The thing with the modern tough guys is they can all play. Back in the enforcer era, you had guys that probably weren't the best hockey players, but they were the best fighters. Now I find that everybody that can fight is a pretty damn good hockey player. Also got a message here from Joe Paddy Palferman from all the way from the United Kingdom. He says, "Hey, coach, listening in England. Proud member of the Royal Air Force out there. I played hockey with him when I was living in England. Good to hear from you, buddy. Thanks for jumping on." Okay, so keep going here. So let's talk a little bit about the code. The code is one of the most unique hockey things in the world. I don't know any other sport, including boxing or even UFC, where the code exists. And the code is, it's kind of an unwritten set of rules. You don't hit a guy when he's down, right? You don't hit a guy, you don't sucker punch a guy in the back of the head. It does happen, but it's not part of the code. That, you hear these stories of respect where you ask a guy to fight before you fight, right? When a guy says he's done, you stop, right? You shake hands after the fight or have a beer after the game. These are all parts of the codes. I'll give it a great example. I believe it was Matt Barnaby was fighting a guy one time. I can't remember who he was, but in the first punch, I want to say it was Rob Ray, but first punch, he breaks his face. The guy broke one of the players' faces, okay? And I remember, so the other player broke Matt Barnaby's ocular bone, okay? And the player fighting said to Barnaby, you could tell he was stunned. He says, "Are you okay?" And Barnaby says to him, "Listen, you broke my left eye. Just don't punch me in the left eye." And they kept going. And there was that respect there that he wasn't going to punch him in the eye again. So, or things like, you hear these stories of enforcers having talked about, let's fight, but a guy might have broke his hand 2 weeks ago, right? And he's like, my hand's broken, I can't fight tonight. Okay, no problem, I'll get you next time around. You hear these stories about guys having this kind of etiquette, and it's respect because it's their job. Rob Ray always said that, Rob Ray's a very, very religious man, okay? Extremely religious. And one of the things he says is, they ask him, how do you justify fighting if you're a man of God? And he says, I'm protecting my teammates. I'm protecting them. And that's how he justified it for his entire life. Okay, so the last part of this is just the reasons to ban fighting. And usually it comes down to injuries. Guys get injured, head injuries. And it's a fair point, but it's not strong enough. And I'll tell you why, okay? And this is kind of the main reason why fighting belongs in the game, okay? When you put 10 skaters on the ice with 2 goalies and referees in an enclosed space, it's a cage, okay? And it is a power nest, okay? And when you play this game, and for those of you who haven't played this game, this might be the eye-opener. When you're going, it's 20 miles per hour, 25 miles per hour, round and around and around, the aggression begins to build, okay? It is the only thing I can kind of compare this to is if you're driving on a freeway and everybody's going about 95 miles per hour and they're weaving in and out of traffic, you know how stressful or angry you get. Well, this is going on in an enclosed environment with 20,000 people watching. The aggression builds, okay? And the reason why fighting can be important, again, this is more in the enforcer era than today, but it still holds true for today. It just happens less, is it diffuses that energy. Okay, when two players fight each other, it diffuses that negative aggression that's going on in the rink. And I can tell you this from playing myself, right? That when two heavyweights go at it and then it's over, everyone kind of feels better. I don't know. I mean, probably not the players getting punched in the face, but you feel that aggression drift away. The business is done. Okay. Now there are situations, obviously, where hatred spills over and there's fight after fight after fight. Okay, being a Philadelphia fan, I've seen my fair share of those. I've seen times where there's 6, 7, 8, 9 guys in the penalty box. Very rare, though, okay? That's the thing the news typically runs with. That's the thing that ESPN used to run with when they were trying to rip on hockey. These happen once a season, or used to happen once a season. They're very rare today. It's not a good example of fighting in the NHL. A good example would be the respect that I'm talking about. So it reduces the aggression. The other thing too is it allows the players to police themselves. When you know that someone's going to take care of business on the ice, it gives guys room. It gives guys understanding that listen, don't go near that guy. Do this. Or be respectful, right? And some guys don't care about this. You hear people talk about cheap players all the time. But no, if you're going to ring the bell, there's got to be an answer to that bell, right? Now, the other big point now is head injuries, okay? So, obviously, with what we know now about CTE and concussions, and what the NHL has done to purposely say, look, we have to avoid contact to the head, it makes you look at fighting a little bit differently. And, we do see videos every few years of a guy getting knocked out, and it's very scary. It's very scary. I'm not going to lie to you about that. And I'd say 10 out of 10 times it's unintentional. I do not know in the modern era of hockey anybody who's really tried to hurt the other player in terms of knocking them out or severely injuring them. Okay, you're fighting, you want to win the fight, but you know what I'm trying to say. So with that said, I think the NHL has taken great moves and great precautions to expand the skill set of the game. It has already reduced fighting, but not to the point that it's just, let's just get rid of it. You need to have the ability to diffuse that energy, that aggression. You have to. Now, this is something I researched in high school. I said this at the top of the episode. I actually did my senior project half my life ago on this topic, okay? And I remember really well, and you can look these statistics up. There was a statistic called acts of aggression in sport, right? And an act of aggression is something that takes place, and they included fighting in this, outside of the rules. So if it's a basketball player throwing a fist or a baseball player hitting someone with a pitch, which you're going to see a lot this season against the Astros, or fighting in other sports, obviously, or a slap after, punch after a football play, acts of aggression. And what they found was that hockey actually, believe it or not, didn't have the highest amount of acts of aggression in sport. I believe football held that title. So that defunct right away one of the biggest things, which hockey is just the most violent sport in the world. It is violent, but it's not the most violent. It was just on par pretty much with every other sport. That surprised the people I was speaking to, and I was able to back it up, obviously, factually. The other thing I talked about, obviously, is the diffusion of that energy. It is a power kick. It is a power kick on the ice. If you've ever played, you understand how tensions can build and build and build and build. All right, and again, if you're playing in adult league, most of the people in adult league can't handle it. Again, I'm going to talk about adult league fighting in a minute because how ridiculous it is. And same thing in junior hockey, where athletes might not be able to control themselves. What do you think it's like at the professional level, where everyone's going a million miles per hour and they're all gigantic athletes and they're more competitive than anyone in the world? What do you think's going to happen? Now, what we found is that when fighting doesn't take place, when you don't diffuse that injury, when you don't diffuse that energy, more injuries, serious injuries, start to happen. And this is when you see things like guys swinging their stick at a guy's head, all right, or guys trying to break someone's arm off with a stick. That tends to not happen when you have fighting in the game. And again, statistics show this. It's a really important part of this, right? So that it diffuses it so worse injuries don't happen. Now, with where we're at in the NHL today, I think most players know, look, I got to avoid head contact. There's too many rules against this for me not to do that. And I think when players are fighting, it's not that they're not aiming for the head. I mean, that's what a fight is. But they know the risks. They're aware of it. And I think they're fighting for the right reasons, right? And again, any player who doesn't do that, it's going to take hell from the rest of the players in the league. All right? This is what happened with Tkachuk and Kassian earlier this season, that people are saying Tkachuk is a cheap player, and he's going to have to answer for that. Now, he comes from a proud family of hockey players that were always a little edgy on the ice, so we'll see where that goes. But that's my point. Is there's not enough evidence to tell me that they should be taking it out of the game. They've significantly reduced it, which I'm not against. Again, knowing what we know now about head injuries, and I think the fact that they focused on the skill more than they focused on the fighting is something that's really important when you look at how they've tried to evolve the game over the last 15 years. And I think they've succeeded at that dramatically. So that's kind of my essay on this. I mean, I'd love to know your thoughts about this. So this is your chance right now. If you have thoughts on this, or you agree, disagree, please feel free to comment in or tell me what your friends are saying about fighting, anything, so we can continue the conversation. I'll give you guys a few minutes to write that while I talk about adult league and youth league and why fighting has no place in those leagues. Starting with adult league, I'll tell you this: when I play, I cannot stand when a guy with a cage starts chirping me and trying to fight me on the ice. And I'll tell you why. One, I rarely, super rarely will do anything overly egregious in an adult league game. It's not the place for it. I've played at a level where fighting is allowed. And I'd say 95% of the people in an adult league have no idea the code, no idea the time to do it, and no idea what they're doing. Most of the time, they're just trying to fight because there's something wrong with them up here. They're just angry at the world, and they want to take it out on someone else. Well, I'm not going to be the punching bag for that. You don't want me to be the punching bag for that. Travis can tell you guys the story of what happens when somebody tries to touch him when I'm out there. It does not ever end well for someone that tries to touch Travis when I'm on the ice with him, okay? Because I don't allow anybody to touch my little brother, all right? Not that Travis can't defend himself, but I'm taller, I'm stronger, I'm better, I'm faster, I'm Lee. Okay, movie reference, okay? It's funny, when someone touches Travis, I look at them, I go, I have a very particular set of skills. I will find you, I will fight you, and I will not kill you, because that's a capital crime, and you go to jail for it. Anyway, there's a really bad Liam Neeson. I don't do it, because it's not something that's led with pure aggression. It's not something that's led with just anger for the world. And the other thing, too, is, they don't know how to fight. Most adult league players don't know how to fight, and they start doing this kind of like lumberjack thing with a cage on. What do you do? If you're trying to fight someone else without a cage, I mean, I think that's a little bit of an advantage, all right, which is ridiculous, all right? So that's the thing, is that there's no place for fighting in the adult league game. Everyone's got to go to work the next day. I mean, not now, but you know what I mean. Everyone's got to go to work the next day, all right? And it just doesn't make any sense to me. I never understood why guys try to do that, or women try and do that in any adult league format. And it's a ban. I mean, there's rules that it's not allowed. In youth hockey, it is super not okay to be fighting, because in my opinion, not only are there disparities in the sizes of someone, especially like when I played in Pee Wee, it's a little different now how they do the age groups, but like you could have a 6-foot kid out there against a 4'5" kid. I mean, it wasn't uncommon, and just the checking alone at that age. Now they don't allow checking in Pee Wee anymore, but it was when your body's growing, it's just not a fair situation. So if that 6-foot kid's just mean and he wants to beat up a little kid, it's not right. I mean, size-wise, right? The other thing, too, is it's not something that needs to be taught. I'll be really frank with you. It's not something that needs to be taught at that level. That's not what the game's about at that level. It's about teamwork, camaraderie, skill sets, learning the game, learning how to be a productive member of society, and using the game as a vehicle for your growth as a person. And should you be deemed well enough or good enough to continue to a higher level, that's wonderful. You can learn that when you get to the higher level. Look, the person that taught me to fight was a fighter at a higher level, and I asked him to teach me. He beat me up in a fight, and I asked him to teach me how to fight, and that's how I learned how to fight. But it was at the right level, and it was taught the right way. He taught me how to fight professionally at that level. And not to mention, some of these guys take boxing classes. I did that too for a while. I wasn't a goon when I played. I don't want to get into my short-lived career, but I know enough to say enough, right? And I've been around the NHL guys enough to kind of have these conversations about these things. Not that I need to keep qualifying myself. I'm just trying to let you know where I'm coming from. So yeah, it's one of those things that it's not a street fight. It's a respect fight. It's a respectful fight. There's a code. And again, the NHL is taking the right steps to reduce fighting without getting rid of fighting. Okay. Now I don't know where they're going to be going with this in the game. Time will tell. I think there's always a place for it, and it's one of those rules. It's like the drop kick rule. It's there if you need it. You know what I mean? Okay, let's read some of your comments because now they're coming in, and then I'm going to jump off here. Unless you guys want to talk about something else. But here we go. It says, I really think there's a good bit of fighting at the wrong time. I see more often that there will be a good and clean open ice hit, and for some reason that sparks a fight. That's from Josh Law. Josh, that's not an unfair point. And those are the types of fights that kind of bug me too. If someone makes a huge hit, that someone drops the gloves and fights. But at the same time, I mean, this goes back to kind of that enforcer mentality that I was talking about of just listen, don't hit my player. If a big player, if McDavid gets rocked on the ice, someone has to tell the other team that that's not okay. Now, again, this is one of those side effects from the new rules. In the enforcer era, it would just be, okay, I'm going to get you the next shift. We have to drop the gloves. That's how it would be. If someone hit Gretzky or hit somebody, they wouldn't necessarily drop the gloves right there. Next shift, they'd line up. We got to go. You can't touch Wayne. Okay, you can't touch our superstar. You can't touch Bure, whatever. Gino Ochik on the Vancouver Canucks. You can't touch Pavel Bure. All right, we're going right. He was an enforcer. All right. And now in the modern era, that's just not the way it works. It's just drop right away and let him go. So I actually would love to hear all of your thoughts on that. If a player makes a big hit and a guy drops the glove, while I don't like it, is it acceptable, right? Let's keep going here. Jeff Dwyer, I'm not one to refuse to drop my blocker and trapper. There's been a few times where it almost happened if my teammates or ref didn't grab me. Well, Jeff Dwyer is a goaltender. I never recommend goalies in an adult league fight. Because that's it for the goaltending for the game, and you're probably going to lose, but I understand where you're coming from. Mark Pollard says, my wife really watches for the fights. So actually, Mark, you bring up a good point. I call it the NASCAR effect. People love watching fights. It's a spectator aspect. That's another reason why this will never be put out of the game, and why it got so prevalent in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was that it did bring fans in. People stood up and cheered for the fights. Now, I always loved the game too. Okay, and I always thought it was a blown out comparison. The comparison is people love the crashes in NASCAR, so they love the fights in the NHL. I think people cheer for fights, but they love the game just as much as they love that. And I think the way the game has grown over the last 10 years, that has proved it, that the fan base isn't getting smaller, it's getting larger, and the league is expanding. So that proves that our fan base is more than just, we like fights and toothless, mulleted hockey players. Jeff Dwyer says, I know Leaves grabbed me off a few in the past as well as Patty too. Yeah, no, listen, again, if I'm in an adult league game and I'm trying to stop you from fighting, there's a reason for it. I can also tell you this. I've let guys go in an adult league once before. I had a player get spit on by another team, and I thought that guy needed to learn a lesson. I know that contradicts kind of what I said before a little bit, but there are times in adult league there is no time. I got to say there's no time when it should be okay, but I also just don't want to see it happen because it ruins the game in an adult league game. Ruins the game, and the refs call everything. Again, it's just mayhem. It doesn't help anything, and then everybody's skating around scared the rest of the game, which is ridiculous. Like everyone's going to start fighting, and it doesn't happen. You know what I mean? Sarah Dalala, did I say your name right? Dalala, Sarah? I think fighting for protection or payback is okay. If someone is being nasty or hurts a player on your team, you defend your player. I love the fighting exclamation point from Sarah on that. And that's my point. I think there is a way to do it respectfully that doesn't compromise the rest of the guys on the ice, right? And that's why I keep saying this in the professional level, all right? Now, and actually, Sharp Shack says this too. This is a great point. Good fight is pulling momentum once it starts to slide. Now, we know that this is real because EA Sports puts it in NHL video games every year, the momentum meter. And when you fight, you build some momentum for your team. But fighting really does build momentum for both teams unless a guy gets seriously rocked, right? Fighting is something that can help you get out of a hitch. We talked about this earlier in the episode. When your team's down by 4 goals, you got to spark something. You got to do something. And I've seen teams do this, and they come back. I've also seen it work against teams where a team will be up by 3 or 4 goals, and a player on the team that's winning starts a fight. Daniel Carcillo was guilty of this a few times in the NHL. He'd start a fight, and it would charge the other team up, and they'd come back. So you got to know when not to come back. Jeff Dwyer asks, how many do you think are personal from off ice or knowing that the other guy does things that are uncalled for off the rink that deserves to have their faces crushed? Very descriptive, Jeff. It depends, right? I'd say a majority of fights do not start that way. I'd say a majority of the fights today, are spur of the moment, or they're in the game. There are some vendettas out there or guys that know other guys. You got to remember too, a lot of NHL guys know each other from junior hockey. Like some of these relationships go way back through their lifetime. But I'd say a majority of them are not not planned like that. Now, you go back to the enforcer era, every night they were planned. I mean, if you were an enforcer going in against the other team, you knew it was going to happen. And you can watch that Last Gladiators movie. They talk about how terrified they were going to an arena because they had to fight the other guy. Josh Law, it's not that I'm against fighting. I'm 100% with you as the two reasons you have fighting in the game. Fighting will always have a place in the game. Love the page and look forward to y'all's content. Josh, thank you for that, buddy. Josh, where are you located? Just so I can give you a shout out. And I do appreciate the support, by the way, of all of you being here tonight, or if you're listening to this on replay. It really does mean a lot to us. The whole point of Puckdrop, let's take a sip of tea here. The whole point of Puckdrop is to be a distraction from what's going on in the world right now. Not just for you, but for me. For those who've been following, I've become a kindergarten teacher for my kids over the past month now. Not to mention, it has completely changed how we do business. And I needed the escape, and I was hoping you did too. And the support you've shown us is, can bring a tear to your eye. I mean that, and I hope that goes both ways. Ray Carcillo wants it to be known that he has Ray Carcillo, our follower, and someone who, he's not a follower, so he's part of our team. He will be playing NHL 20 shortly after this episode ends in about a half an hour. It's 9:00 now, Eastern Standard Time. Is not related to Daniel Carcillo, of the former NHL player who is now really big into cannabis for some reason. I don't know. You can go figure that one out. Josh Law says he's from Biloxi, Mississippi. I know Biloxi real well, Josh. I used to live out in the Pensacola area when my wife served in the Air Force. We were at Eglin Air Force Base right near Fort Walton Beach. I used to drive out to Biloxi to play in tournaments. And one of my favorite movies was Biloxi Blues. Biloxi completely rocked by Hurricane Katrina, but I was really fortunate enough to live in the South to see them recover from that. Strong people down there in the Gulf Coast, and I know Mississippi is not right there, but Biloxi as well. It is Gulf Coast, actually. I'm thinking about it. Great shout out there, okay? Caitlin Elizabeth says, I've seen a fair share, but I missed the era when it was more prevalent. In the right moment, I love it, but I also love the skill. So that's a great point. Caitlin is a newer hockey fan, although her passion is just the same as all of us. Trust me, it doesn't matter when you jump in. So she never saw the Enforce era that most of us probably grew up in. She grew up in the skill era. She's actually a testament to, she loves the game. She loves the game. And it shows you that, fighting's not needed to bring people in. And I always said, people used to defend it in the sense of I need it for that. Hockey fans are more than just fight addicts. I mean, again, it's part of the game, but it's like anything, man. Fighting in any game raises the crowds, right? But outside UFC and boxing, you're not going there for that. At least not anymore. Jeff Dwyer says, Billy Madison teaching kids. Just say it. Yeah, I wish I was Billy Madison. That would be a lot more fun. Unfortunately, Jeff, when it's your kids, you take it pretty seriously. So Logan's been, my son Logan asked me the other day, because I said to him, I'm your teacher now. He goes, but you're my dad. I said, I'm your dad and a teacher. He goes, but you're a coach. I said, that's what parenting is, son. I said, but I love you. I love you more than anything in the world. But I'm your teacher in the mornings now. Okay, and we have to do our assignments. It's actually been a pretty amazing effort on the school district and the parents to make sure that we continue this during this time. Teamwork. It's all about teamwork. Josh Law asked if I'm an Ice Pilots fan. Well, the Pensacola Ice Pilots were not there when I was there. They were called the Pensacola Ice Flyers. And yeah, I had some run-ins with that team. In fact, the league I played in, the ECIHL, I think, look at this. This is weird. I have the puck from the Emerald Coast Ice Hockey League. We used to play out of the Pensacola Ice Rink, which I can't remember the name of it now. They call it the Hangar now, but the Pensacola Ice Flyers, who have won several SPHL championships. And there's the league I used to work in. I used to run this league. I was a commissioner in this league. I used to play in this league. That's what I did on the Florida Gulf Coast. Isn't that weird? That was on my desk. Just happened to be here the other day. I think that was going to come out tonight. So the Ice Flyers, part of the SPHL. Josh, Biloxi doesn't have it. Do they still have a team? I'm not sure if they still have a team in Biloxi. Let me know. But the SPHL, really prevalent in that area, Southern Professional Hockey League, a league I dabbled in, dare I say. Now, when I was around that league, it was a full-on goon league, fighting league. It has since evolved into a skill league, which is pretty amazing. Still to this date, only one player, there's a little trivia for you, only one player in SPHL history that I know of has made it to the NHL. And I will tell you that player has won a Stanley Cup. Can you name that player? I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay, you can Google it. I'm not going to know if you do anyway. One player from SPHL history has made it all the way to the NHL, and they have won the Stanley Cup. I will give you a clue. It is a goaltender. That is a goaltender. That's your clue. So yeah, listen, I hope I've made a good good argument for why fighting should never go away. I also hope I've made it clear that it has diminished, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. The game has changed, and skill is now king, and speed is king, and I think it's great that that's happened. I'll be very honest with you. My gift when I played was my speed. I could skate really fast. And this was the clutch and grab era, so guys could grab my jersey, they could trip me, I mean, they could hold me. I would have loved to play in today's NHL, and if you could give me time back, which is the greatest commodity on the planet, which is not possible. I don't look back. I'm joking here. I would have much more fun in the game today than I did then. But I love the game no matter what, and I'm just blessed that I'm even been involved in the game, been able to play the game at any time period. Not backtracking here, but that's just the way it is sometimes. You know what I mean? I'm getting a lot of people coming in here now. So Jeff Dwyer, how many guesses do you want, man? How many guesses do you want? Real quick. So Josh Law says, unfortunately, our team, the Mississippi Surge, that's the team I was thinking of, folded in 2014 before they had the Mississippi Seawolves of the ECHL. And the answer is, okay, so Josh Law and Jeff Dwyer have guessed it is Scott Darling, the only SPHL player to make it to the NHL, and he has won the Stanley Cup. Everybody's coming in now. Scott Darling, yes. I don't believe Darling's in the NHL anymore. It was a real quick up and down. He was with Chicago, if I remember correctly. Tell me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe he won with Chicago. I've always been more of a minor league fan than the NHL. Josh, that's interesting. Sometimes I wonder, Josh, and let me know, Josh, if you lived in Mississippi your entire life. But one of the weird things, and this is one of the cool things and the benefits of moving around the world, and really living, not visiting, but living in other regions, is you get within the culture. And one of the things that really not shocked me, but was surprising to me about the Southeast United States culture is that professional sports are not larger than collegiate sports, specifically SEC sports, right? That was the first time in my life I lived somewhere where the NHL, the NFL, MLB, they were not king. It was their college, local college, well, not always local, but their SEC team or the college team of their choice was king, right? So I always found that was amazing. And that's why minor league sports sometimes have a better following in those areas because it gives you a little bit more of that feel. Although I do want to give a shout out to any minor league sports fan because those teams really rely on you. I know we live close to the Hershey Bears and the Flyers have a team up in Allentown. The Phantoms, not Philadelphia Phantoms, the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. So minor league teams really live off the dollar and the dime of the fans that come to those games. You really keep those teams going more than people realize. So, yeah, Ray Carcello just confirmed that Scott Darling did win with Chicago. Ray says he did Google the answer and he didn't want to say. I respect it. That's fair. I thought of that off the top of my head, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself right now. Humble brag. I wasn't humble. And then Jeff Dwyer says, yeah, Corey Crawford. He said Corey Crawford up above. He said that popped in his head because I knew it was in Chicago. So, yeah, just by association. Jeff Dwyer says he is a Marksman fan, another SPHL team. Is that Fayetteville? What team? That's Fayetteville, right? Jeff, let me know what team that is, the Marksman. Fayetteville used to be the Fire Ants. I don't think that is Fayetteville. Who is that, Jeff? What team is the SPHL team near you in North Carolina? I await your answer. But yeah, there you go. So that's tonight's episode, everybody. I just want to thank you once again for jumping on. Again, next week's topic will most likely be greatest rivalries in NHL history. I'm hoping that's one that generates up a lot of interest because it is really a great topic. Another big topic that people wanted to hear about was the rule changes or potential ends to the season for this year, which is it's a good topic to talk about. The problem is it changes every single week. So I'm still hopeful that we'll have an end to the 1920 season and not just hey, listen, we're going to end it. I mean, if this goes on too long, they'll do that, but let's be hopeful. Let's be hopeful they're playing hockey in the summer and they find a way to do it. I know they were talking about doing a tournament-style playoffs at several regional rinks around the country. That could be really cool, but anything to bring the game back at this point. Yeah, just reading the rest of your comments here. Josh Law says he has lived in the South his entire life. He says, I missed the golden age of minor league hockey in the 90s through the early 2000s. I was at the sold-out Game 7 in the 99 Kelly Cup Finals where Bruce Boudreau won the Kelly Cup with the Seawolves in front of a sold-out crowd. I actually read about that championship in his book. It's called Gabby. Bruce Boudreau, a long-time minor league coach before he made it to the NHL, still has not won a cup. Fortunately or unfortunately, if you're a fan of the man. But yeah, that was a great era of minor league hockey. You know why, man? It's because the internet was not super prevalent yet. And you know, you needed your hockey fix somehow, and the minor league team was always a great option. So yeah, Jeff says Fayetteville is correct, who used to be the Fire Ants, and the owner's name is Chuck Norris. Is that true? That's awesome. So I guess I was right. It's Fayetteville Marksmen. So an SPHL team there. Yeah, so Mark Pollard says, yes, let's make sure we do that rivalry topic next week. He says Avs versus Wings. Again, probably the hottest rivalry over a short period of time, but definitely not the biggest rivalry in NHL history. That's a topic I'd love to talk about. And I'll put it up for a vote next week because the show's about you. You get to pick the topic. So with that, I'm going to thank you. I've gone almost an hour here. I want to remind you all, as I do at the end of every episode, I know this isn't easy, and some people are dealing with it better than others, and I know that some people are in better situations than others, and I know there are people out there on the front lines, and they're not soldiers. They're grocery clerks. They're mail people. They're doctors. They're healthcare workers. They're the people that deliver stuff to the grocery stores, that people that, you know, were never looked at as heroes, but you're heroes now, and the world knows it, and I hope it's something that we never forget. And if you're not working right now, if you're sitting at home, if your ability in this plight, your contribution is sitting at home and not spreading the disease, you're a hero too. We all have our part to play in this, and there's no easy part, right? But this is one of those things that the human species has to rise up together here. Countries have to rise up together here and find a solution to the problem, and I think that we are doing that. And although we live in an age of lots of scrutiny and lots of criticism and pointing fingers and media and digital stuff, if you take a second and put all that stuff aside and look at the world, majority of people are doing the right thing right now. Majority of people are taking care of their families and spending time with their children, reconnecting with friends and working on things and finding a way through this. And I think that that's the thing we need to be focusing on. I think the fact that you're here on this podcast tonight shows that. Right? So keep doing what you're doing wherever you are, whatever your situation is. Stay strong. Find an anchor for yourself to keep moving forward. All right? This has been inspiring to me as much as it's been painful. And I'm fortunate that I get to communicate like this. I'm fortunate that, you know, I'm in the position I'm in. And I know there's people out there that aren't as fortunate. I think about you every single day, no matter what your position is. So once again, I want to thank you all for coming on. I want to thank you all for listening to Puckdrop Live. We'll have another topic here next week. As long as you keep wanting to see them, I'll keep doing them. Feel free to send me comments or send me messages, anything you want. And I will see you next week. This has been Lea Elias with We Live Hockey. Well, that was a horrible sign off. This has been Lea. Guys, this has been Lea Elias with We Live Hockey, Hockey Wraparound, Elimination Cafe. Make sure you stay tuned for 9:30 p.m. Eastern. If you're watching this live, Ray Carcillo will be playing NHL 20. He won most of his games last week. Check him out on Twitch. It's funny. He does live play-by-play while he's playing. You won't see anything like it. It's the closest thing you're going to get to real hockey now. Anyway, that's next up on the WLEE Network. We'll see you next week.